Today's lesson is to evaluate equivalent fractions and also note these fractions on a number line. We'll begin with a fairly simple example today. We see that we have the whole number 1 and our fraction strips are beneath to show us the relationship between 1 and our fraction strips. Our first task is to find equivalent fractions. So you can see that we have the fraction 1/2. And another way to name that fraction would be 2/4. 1/2 is exactly the same length as 2/4. So 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Our next thought is, how do we represent this on a number line? So representing our 1/2, we would start with 0 and our number line would finish at 1. 1/2, you'll remember, is located exactly in the center of the number line. It's halfway for the entire length of this line segment. Now we have fourths. We can also divide this number line into fourths. So from 0, we would have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4 would be another way to name 1. We can also do that for 0/4. Our main purpose today is finding equivalent fractions on a number line. So you can see we have 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Similarly to our fraction strips, 1/2 equals 2/4. The same is true on our number line. 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Our next example is similar to the previous one, but this time we're comparing thirds and sixths. Again, we have the whole number 1 to represent the relationship between a whole and a fractional piece. So this time we have 2/3, and we're comparing that to 4/6. Again, we've created equivalent fractions. The length of the two fractions is exactly the same. So 2/3 is equal to 4/6. And we write that 2/3 equals 4/6. Let's now represent that same information on a number line. We begin at 0, and our number line is ending at 1. We'll begin with 2/3. So we have our number line broken into 3 parts. We begin with 0 or 0/3, 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3 or 1. Next, we'll break our number line into sixths. So we can start at 0/6, 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and 6/6. So we're looking for the equivalent fraction of 2/3 equals 4/6. And we can see that represented here at this point on the number line. What's also interesting is we see the equivalent of 1/3 and 2/6, but that's not the information we want represented at this time. Equally interesting, we can see that 3/6 would also equal 1/2. But again, that is not our equation today. Our interest is in 2/3 being equal to 4/6, and we find that information on the number line as well. Our final example for today is comparing fourths and eighths. Again, we have the 1/2 so that we can evaluate that a fraction is less than 1/2. Let's begin. We first see that we have 3/4, and we're comparing that to 6/8. They represent and are exactly the same length. So we say they are equivalent. They are the same. So 3/4 is equivalent to 6/8. 3/4 equals 6/8. It's also good to learn how to represent this information on a number line. So for today's exercise, we'll have a number line starting at 0 and ending at 1. Let's begin first by filling in our fourths. We will need to break this number line into 4 parts. And this time we'll start with 0/4, then 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. You can see the line is broken into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. The next step is to break the number line into eighths. Again, starting at 0, we have 0/8, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8, which is also the number 1. Our fractions, however, are 3/4 and 6/8. So we're interested in locating that position on the number line. And when we look carefully, we can see that 3/4 and 6/8 are in the same point on the number line. 3/4 and 6/8 are equivalent, so they're found in the same location. What's interesting and goes beyond our assignment for today, we can see a variety of equivalent fractions. Of course, 0/4 and 0/8 is exactly the same. They are equivalent. In addition, 1/4 and 2/8 are equivalent. 2/4 and 4/8 would be equivalent fractions. We've already found that 3/4 and 6/8 is equivalent. And of course, 4/4 and 8/8 equals 1, and so they are equivalent. Reviewing quickly so that we focus on the question being asked, an equivalent fraction for 3/4 would be 6/8. 3/4 is equal to 6/8. In a representation on a number line, when we plot our fourths and we plot our 8 parts between 0 and 1, we find that 3/4 and 6/8 share the exact point, the exact same point on a number line. That concludes our lesson for today. The main point and consideration is that regardless whether you're using fraction strips or plotting equivalent fractions on a number line, equivalent fractions are always equal. They are always exactly the same amount.